Let's dye Easter eggs using nature. I love doing this. This is something I have done for years with my own kids growing up, classes and events that I have done in the past with other kids of all ages. And it's something that I really like because I dove really deep for a while there into how to use plants and food to actually use it as a replacement for dyes instead of synthetic, something natural for clothing and paper and other things. So this is something I love teaching and I love playing with, but this is a great way to swap out those synthetic dyes and colorings for something natural from nature. Way better for you. Because as you know, if we're dyeing eggs for the family and the kids, they're going to eat the eggs later. And how many times have you cracked open those eggs and you see the dye leaked through there and then that's what they're eating, right? It's just not even necessary to use those synthetic dyes when nature has given us an amazing palette to work with. So let's talk about how you do it, and then we'll talk about what gives you what colors, because that's really fun. So first of all, I always tell kids when I'm doing this with kids, let's have fun. This is like science, so let's experiment, right? Because you'll get different things on different days according to the plant, because nature, right? So that's something to remember. But the basic way in which you will take plant material, food material, and turning it into a dye that you can use and that actually sticks is this. You're going to take your plant material or your food, and then you're going to add a pretty good amount of water. How much? Well, it depends. I usually do at least half a gallon to maybe a half a gallon for each color. And then I make sure I have enough plant material or food material for that to be pretty beefy. And again, this is an experiment, and we'll talk about it as we go through each one and each color as to how much you need exactly. But you want to make sure that you put the item, the plant material or food in the water, bringing up to a boil, and then I turn it down just enough that you have a simmering boil. And I put the lid on it, and I do this for at least 30 minutes. A good little boil going for 30 minutes. If you go longer, you'll usually get an even more deep, rich color. So you can go longer for deeper, richer colors. You can do it slightly less time-wise for more pastels. So this is also a way you can vary your color palette even using the same thing, right? Now, once that is done, you want to strain out all the material and keep your liquid, and I let it cool to room temperature. And it may take a good hour, maybe 2 hours. I like to keep it room temperature rather than refrigerate it, because this is going to really impact when you add your mordant or your fixant to make it stick to the egg or not. So I generally set it out, leave it on the counter for an hour to 2 hours until it's fine to the touch. Again, if you have little guys in there, you want to make sure it's not too hot for them if they get it on themselves, right? Which they will. It's what happens, right? So once you've done that, then I take all the little pots that I'm using or bowls for dyeing my eggs in, just like you would if you get those synthetic dyes and they have you use cups for each one. And I typically use really good, wide, tall, thick coffee mugs for that. You can use even use mason jars for that. Mason jars are nice, just make sure it's the wide mouth at the top so you can get in and out of it, and that it's more of a short one. Don't use the big quart, use a pint. It's going to be way easier, and that way you can see what's in there, because how many times have you been dyeing Easter eggs with your kids and they forget if one's in there or not because they can't see it, right? That's another reason I like the mason jars, because you can kind of see what's in there. It's so helpful. So you're going to have everything set up, and if you use a pint, that's a pretty good measurement. I generally do my fixant to my water bath like this, or my dye bath like this. I will do about a cup to a cup and a half of my water, my dye, whatever dye that is, to about 1 to 1.5 tablespoons of white distilled vinegar. There are other mordants you can use. A mordant or a fixant is something that helps it stick to the egg a little better. Do you have to do this? No, but it will give you a little bit more rich color, and certain plant material and food materials are really not going to stick as well unless you add this vinegar. So you can also do it with apple cider vinegar. That works just as well. So you're going to have your, let's say you're using pint mason jars, and I fill it like 3/4 of the way full. Don't fill that all the way full with the liquid, because you have to have room when you put the egg in for a displacement, right? So it doesn't go all over the place. So I fill it about a cup, cup and a half instead of the full 2 cups of my dye. And then I add my 1 to 1.5 tablespoons of vinegar in there. This is all room temperature. Stir it really well. Have them all labeled and ready. Then when you go to dye it, you will carefully place your eggs in there and then let them stay. Obviously, just like dyeing anything else, the longer they stay in the dye bath, the darker, more rich the color is, generally speaking, right? So again, if you want pastel colors, put them in for a short time. You want longer, leave it in even longer, right? So we're gonna talk colors, and then we're gonna talk about how to decorate them with some fun and funky ways from nature, okay? So colors, what do we get for colors? I have a few ideas here, but this is only going to scratch the surface to get you started in exploring colors. So I like using skins from onions, and of course, obviously, according to what color skin you start with will greatly impact the color you get. Generally speaking, when you use yellow onion skins, you're generally going to get a little bit more of a rust color or orangey color, yellowish orange. When you use red, it'll still be a little more rust color, but a little bit of that red will pop up into a stronger red then, unless you have a large amount of that, and then it can be a little more toward red. So I would take this and I would crumple it up really, really good, because the more you tear it apart into smaller pieces, the more it's going to extract into the water faster. So this makes it a little easier. How much would I use? So if I'm doing 1/2 gallon of the liquid, or maybe you're doing way less, you're doing a quart of it. Let's say you're doing a quart. I would probably take the skins from about 4 to 6 large onion and put it in there. You're gonna bring that up to the boil and then let it stay in there with the lid on. The reason we want the lid on is so that all the color stays and you don't lose too much of that liquid. You really want it all in there. So that's what I would do for onion skins. You can also use beets, and beets give you a great pink to red color depending on how much you're actually doing in there. So let's talk about how much goes in there. In that same quart size jar of water, I would probably do half a pound to 3/4 of a pound of beets. This is about a 1/2 pounder, just to give you an idea. And I chop it up really, really small, or you can even stick it in the water and beets into a blender, whoop, and then put it on that boil. And then when you're done in 30 minutes or so, strain out all the mush. What you have behind is your liquid, and that'll give you a nice red color. Maybe pink if you're just doing it a little bit shorter time. Of course, pastels, right? Coffee is another fun one. You can brew 2 cups of really dark, rich coffee with a large amount of coffee grains, a little stronger than you might drink. Doing that brewed gives you a nice brown palette, but the longer it goes in there and the more vinegar you have in there, it turns more rust and red brown, which is kind of pretty and unique. The other thing you can do is chili powder will give you a nice red orange color in there. Again, depending on how much you put in is going to depend on how much you get out. How much of this would I use in that quart size water? I like things kind of strong, so I would use 3 to 4 tablespoons of this powder in there, maybe a little more, and let it do its boil for quite some time. You really want it to be good, and then do a really good strain on it. When I strain powders, I generally use like a cloth bag or a nut milk bag. That way all the powder's going to stay inside and what's left is just your dye. That's going to be easier to work with. Turmeric. Yeah, great yellow color. I mean vibrant, strong yellow color. It can even go golden if you go even further. So I like to use fresh, but you can absolutely use powder. If you use powder, I would use somewhere between 3 and 4 tablespoons of it. It's going to be pretty strong in your quart size water. If you use fresh, then I would probably do somewhere around this amount. You can put it on a scale if you want. It's going to be close to 2 ounces. And again, I leave the peel on, chop it small, or put it in that blender with the water, then boil it. It's a great color, and remember, it's going to stain your hands too, because that's how strong of a colorant that one is. Let's go green. So you can use spinach for green. You can also use chlorella or spirulina powder for green. And again, the difference is going to be if you're using spinach, I would probably be doing like 2 cups of it kind of packed in there, and I would cut it a bit, then stick it in with that quart of water, and then get it doing its 30-minute boil. If you use a powder, again, I'd probably use about 3 to 4 tablespoons of that in there. You can also use liquid chlorophyll. That stuff's amazing and requires no boiling whatsoever. For that, it usually is sold and you're gonna get it by the dropper full. If you have a 1 ounce dropper, I would probably use 3 to 4 dropperfuls in that quart amount of water. You'll see it's very strong, and you'll see a bright, vibrant green with that, and that's going to stain anything it touches, so be very careful with it. Let's go blue. I don't have it here, but red cabbage, believe it or not, will give you blue purples, depending on how far you go with it. So for red cabbage, I would probably cut up almost a pound worth of it and cut it real small, and then put it in that quart of water, bring it to a boil, strain it out, and that's what you would do for blue. But you can also use this guy, which is blue spirulina, and a little bit goes a long way. This is a different proportion for your powders. For this one, I would look at doing more like a tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half. You could go to 2 tablespoons, but that's about as far as you need to go with it. And then do your whole process and strain it out. Again, it's going to stain everything it touches. This one's fun. I love this one with kids because we get to try different colors from one thing. This is butterfly pea flower. You can make this in a tea, and the way I would do this is use about a half a cup, maybe 3/4 of a cup into that quart of water. Bring it to a boil, let it go for its 30 minutes, strain it out, and this is going to give you somewhere in the range of blue purple. But here's the fun part. Add a little bit of lemon juice to it, it'll turn it more pink purple, like magic. So that's a fun one that you can kind of get 2 different colors out of that one alone by itself. This is just an introduction of ideas of what you can play with. Yes, you can play with other greens. Think about the color it looks like. If you chop it up and does it leave anything behind, that's probably going to be helpful. Blueberries are great. You can use blueberry juice or blueberries that you put in a blender with the water. If you use fresh blueberries, it's probably going to be at least 6 ounces, maybe 8 to get that quart of water. But if you use blueberry juice, you're going to use way more of the juice. So probably more like 2 full cups of that in there with your quart of water. Doesn't really need to boil as long. So there's other things you can play with and experiment with. I highly recommend it. Blackberries are fun to get some purples going, and raspberries can be a little more red. So have fun exploring the colors with your little ones. Let's talk about decorating. So you can do a resist by using just a plain wax candle. You can get a strong like candlestick, and I use white, and you can draw on it like names, patterns, colors, which means wherever you draw on it, it will not dye the egg. And so whatever is left, you put it in the dye and it will dye the egg. That's called a resist. And so that's actually very, very helpful. So you can also use a white Crayola to do the same concept. And when you're done, you can brush all that off. It does the same type of idea. Another idea is to take plants or small flowers from the yard, little bitty guys. You can take those little flowers. Oxalis is great right now, and looks like a clover with a purple or white flower. You can take the flower. When the egg is wet, you can put the leaf and the flower on, and it kind of sticks there. How do you get it to stay in the dye, right? Because that's what you're after. So I've used a couple tricks. Way back in the day, you used to have access to pantyhose all the time that would run and get runners in them, and I would use that in usually white or a nude color pantyhose. You don't want the colored ones, it'll actually color your egg. But you can also do it with tights, white tights that may have gotten a runner. What are you going to do with it? Pink ones. And you put your egg in there and wrap it so that it holds the plant material tight to the egg, and then you dip it in, take it off, and that way it'll have your plant material designed to stay on there, which is kind of fun. You can also try it with gauze, but I would do cheesecloth or gauze that's very wide. So the idea is there's not a lot, it's not completely, you can see through it is what you want. You want to be able to see through it and use that. Sometimes that'll leave a pattern on the egg, which is actually kind of fun. So there's lots of ways you can get fun patterns in there as you're working your way through using nature. It's a fun science experiment you can do with your kids, and learning what nature will give you makes it so much fun, because you can even go and collect those things from the yard, and that makes it a whole process and not just a sit down, use some dye and leave, right? So hopefully this is giving you some ideas of what you can use with nature to dye those eggs naturally and swap out those heavy chemical dyes. Thanks, guys.